Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to this webinar presented by the Global CCS Institute. I'm Jeff Erickson. I'm the General Manager for the Americas region at the Global CCS Institute, and I'm joining you today from our office in Washington, D.C. I'd like to give a big welcome to our international audience. We have attendees participating today from all around the globe. Over the next hour, you all will have the opportunity to hear directly from a key member of the Shell Quest project team about their experience with a highly successful carbon capture and storage facility in the Canadian province of Alberta. Simon O'Brien joined Shell Canada in 1997 and has worked in seismic processing, new technology development, depth imaging, and quantitative interpretation for more than 18 years. His work has included a wide variety of projects: structural and stratigraphic, conventional and unconventional, onshore and offshore, across Canada and the United States. His current role is the Quest Storage Manager, overseeing the subsurface aspects of the Quest CCS project. I'm going to spend just a minute giving you a sense of the mechanics of the webinar. Over the next 30 minutes, you'll hear from Simon directly with his presentation, and then we'll have the opportunity for question and answer with the other webinar participants. Participants are welcome to submit questions throughout the presentation through the Questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. The questions will be received by us here in Washington, and as time permits, we'll pose them to Simon at the end of the presentation. Please be aware that we may not be able to answer all questions today. However, we will try to get through as many questions as possible in this session. And now, over to Simon.
Oh, there we go. Hi, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Quest CCS project and some of the things that we've seen in our first year of operations. I have to start with a cautionary statement. It's a little bit wordy, but basically all it says is that I'm not a financial advisor, and so don't use what I'm going to say to make any decisions on whether to buy or sell stocks in Shell. I thought I would just throw up a slide that talks a little bit about Shell's response to the CO2 challenge. We've acknowledged for some time that we think climate change is something that we should be concerned about, and something that we've got to do something about right away. We have four main pillars to our response. One is natural gas, which we see as a transition fuel that is lower carbon than some of the other hydrocarbons and may be useful in the medium term. Biofuels are a nice potential in that they are relatively carbon neutral. Efficiency is an easy one because it not only reduces CO2 emissions, but it also actually makes some money. And then carbon capture and storage we see as being particularly useful in that from a hydrocarbon perspective, it's difficult to find ways that you can reduce your carbon while still using hydrocarbons. Shell's portfolio in the CCS and carbon capture and storage and carbon capture utilization and storage profile. We've got at least 5 projects on the go right now. We're a participant in Technology Centre Mongstad in Norway. We're a partner in Chevron's Gorgon project in Australia. We've just become involved in the Lula CCUS project in Brazil through our purchase of BG. Our involvement in Boundary Dam and several other projects is primarily through our CANSOL subsidiary, which has developed some good capture technologies. And then we've got Quest, and so Quest is what I'm going to talk about today. So as a bit of an overview, Quest is the world's first full-scale CCS project for oil sands. It's a joint venture between Shell, Chevron, and Marathon. We capture CO2 at the Scotford upgrader, which upgrades bitumen from our oil sands mine in Fort McMurray to create synthetic crude. One of the outputs from that is a fair amount of CO2, and we've captured a fairly significant amount of that. We're storing the CO2 in a saline aquifer, the basal Cambrian sands, which are at a depth of about 2 kilometers. The net impact is about 25 million tons of CO2 that we plan to capture over a 25-year period. That represents about a third of the CO2 from the upgrader, which is equivalent to the emissions of about 250,000 cars. And the technology is pretty standard syngas capture using amine technology. And I'll talk about all those things in a little bit. So I thought I'd start with the CO2 capture. One of the things we need to upgrade the bitumen is hydrogen, and our hydrogen units combine steam and natural gas to produce high pressure steam and hydrogen for the upgrader. One of the byproducts of that is CO2, and our amine unit uses Shell technology to capture that CO2 directly from the process. We're currently capturing about 80% of the CO2 from the flue of the hydrogen units, from the output gas of the hydrogen units, and the process produces a very clean, 99% pure CO2 output. The capture facility was built using Fluor's integrated modular construction. That's won several awards, and actually delivered the project on time and under cost. So it was a very successful project. A quick update on the capture has basically been that it's going really well. We've had great uptime. The actual operating costs have been quite a bit below what we were expecting, primarily due to really low gas prices right now and quite cheap electricity. In addition to that, our amine recycle has been really successful, and we've actually been using much less amine than we originally expected. Transportation, the CO2, once it comes out of the capture plant, is dehydrated and compressed to somewhere around 10 megapascals. The idea being that we want to keep the CO2 in a dense phase through the pipeline. The pipeline is about 65 kilometers long, runs north to our injection facilities. Has 6 block valves to isolate segments anywhere from 4 to 15 kilometers long. The idea being that if there are any issues with the pipeline, we can quickly shut it down and isolate the CO2 in segments. Pipeline construction took about a year, between October 2013 and August 2014. Lots of stakeholder interaction. One of the underlying themes of the development of Quest has been that we've been very careful to work with our local stakeholders a lot and make sure that we're addressing any of their concerns. We spent a long time cleaning and running pigs through the pipeline to make sure that it was very well cleaned before we started injection. We then preserved it with nitrogen to make sure that it was ready to go. First CO2 into the pipeline happened in August 2015. One quick observation on the transportation sector was that all that cleaning that we did was to make sure that there was no impurities in the pipeline that could clog up the reservoir when we started injection. To provide an extra check on that, we put in a bunch of filters at the well sites to make sure that anything that did come down the pipeline would be caught. We found that the injection stream has been extremely clean so far, and as a result, the filters have not really done very much of anything. On the well side, the storage facility consists of 3 injection sites. Each of the well pads has 1 injection well, 1 deep monitoring well, and multiple shallow groundwater wells. The wells were all drilled with conventional drilling methods, multiple steel casings for the injection wells, 3 in the freshwater zone, all of which were cemented all the way to surface. Very secure wells. In addition, we have a very comprehensive measure, monitor, and verify program, or MMV program, which I'll talk about a little bit in a second. On the well side, although we have 3 well sites, we're actually only using 2. The wells have been performing extremely well. The reservoir has been very receptive to the CO2, and as a result, we haven't needed to bring on the 3rd well yet, and we may never need to. As a result, we're able to use that currently as an additional monitor well, and because it's right down in the reservoir, it's providing some useful information about far field reservoir response. The storage complex is the BCS, the Basal Cambrian Sands. It's about 2 kilometers deep, as I said before, a saline aquifer. It's below any potable water zones or any zones with hydrocarbon potential. So there's very little reason for anybody else to want to drill a well into our reservoir. There are multiple thick continuous seals, more than 150 meters within the complex. That includes a very nice thick Upper Cambrian shale, which is our primary seal, as well as a couple of salts, which means that the seal is extremely good. On top of that, we have a really high-quality sandstone reservoir, 17% porosity and 1,000 millidarcy permeability. And our experience in the first year has been that the reservoir has performed at least as well as we've expected. Potentially considerably better, though we're still gathering data on that. The Measure, Monitor, and Verify plan, the MMV plan, is very conservative. Because this is a first-of-a-kind facility, both for Shell and for Alberta, we really were careful to include anything that might be a concern. As a result, it's extremely comprehensive. It has monitoring systems in place for everything from the atmosphere through geosphere down into the reservoir. It's risk-based and site-specific, independently reviewed to make sure that we've got all our bases covered. And it's a combination of new and traditional technologies, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those in a second. In addition, we collected a bunch of baseline data and made sure that we have a plan in place that includes everything from a few years before we start injection to at least 10 years post closure, to ensure that once we leave the site, it's in as good a shape as it was when we started. So a few examples of some of the technology we've got deployed. Our atmospheric monitoring system is light source. This is a new technology that's been developed over the last year or two. Essentially what it does is fires lasers from one of the corners of our well site over to reflectors at the other 3 corners. The beam returns to a CO2 sensor, which gives us an idea of how much CO2 the laser has seen on the well site. The interaction of the CO2 with the wind conditions, it means that we are able to not just detect any potential leaks, but also quantify and locate them, so we can actually sort out what's going on. We did a release test procedure before we started injection, and that went really successfully. All the releases were detected, quantified quite well, and actually located on the site pretty nicely. And as a result, we've confirmed it as the technology we're going to use for atmospheric monitoring at Quest. It's now been in operation for a year. We're gradually refining the software to make it even better, to account for things like the extra noise you have when the weather is particularly poor in snow or fog, for example. And we have a lot of confidence that it's doing what we want it to do. Groundwater monitoring has been particularly important. It's been a source of major interaction with our landowners. Because we've sampled pretty much all the landowner wells in the area to ensure that we've got a good baseline, we've connected with all those landowners and have developed quite a good relationship with them all. In addition to the landowner wells, we also have a continuous monitoring program on our own project wells, on the groundwater wells on our well sites, and those are that program is conducted using these sensors that are continuously recording information and sending it back to the office. And so we're continuously watching to make sure that there's no issues on the well site. We've now got a really comprehensive baseline data set, and it's hasn't shown any issues yet, but it's been a very nice data set. Microseismic monitoring, so we have a microseismic array in the center of our 3 wells. This is a response to concerns about induced seismicity that we've seen in injection programs elsewhere. Primarily water injection sites have had some issues with induced seismic. We're pretty confident that the Quest facility is in a very tectonically quiet area, and so we really don't expect to see very much. And sure enough, we've been recording now for a little over 2 years, and we've seen, well, at this point we've seen one. We've now actually seen 2 events, both of them very small, -1 to -2 kind of events. That's sort of equivalent to the amount of energy released when you drop a book from a couple of meters high. The events look to be 3 or 4 kilometers away from the well sites, somewhere around the basement, and don't appear to have anything to do with our injection program. We just have a very sensitive piece of equipment on site, and so we're able to pick up pretty much anything. A lot of the surface noise that you see on the plot there, the yellow things, has to do with activities on and around the well site. We are pretty much in the middle of a farmer's field, so every time the guy drives his tractor, we can see it. From the geosphere, so this is, we have a number of technologies. One of the key ones is vertical seismic profiles. So a vertical seismic profile is conducted when you basically take vibroseismic trucks and shake the surface of the ground. We have sensors in the wells, these fiber optic cables, which act like extended microphones, and they give you a picture of what the sound looks like as it travels through the earth. Each of the events are nice reflections. What you see is the amplitude and response of the seismic to the rock properties changes when you change the fluid in the pore space. And as a result, when we changed between the 2015 baseline, which was shot before we started injection, and the 2016 repeat, things have changed a little bit. And you can see a little bit of a brightening right around the well site. So that's pretty much where the CO2 has gone in the reservoir. The response has been pretty consistent with what we thought we would see. Radius is a couple of 100 meters at that time. It's probably a little bit bigger than that now. But that's pretty consistent with what we would expect to see. In addition, one of the other things that we've been repeating is a pulse neutron log. So a pulse neutron log gives you, again, a picture of what the rocks close to the well look like from that log perspective. So a pulse neutron is a slight radioactive source that produces a response in the rock. The response is largely driven by the fluid content in the rock, and so any change in the fluid content produces a change in the log. And so the 2 lines here, a black line and a red line, they separate between the first shoot and the second shoot, similar timing to the VSP. And what you can see is some of the green shading in between there tells you where the CO2 is in the subsurface. What we see is that the CO2 is largely confined to the perf zone. There's that big red triangle at the bottom, or sorry, big red rectangle at the bottom of the BCS is the primary perf zone. There's one little perf above that where we did some mechanical testing of the reservoir. And you can see that the CO2 is pretty much constrained within that zone. There are some thickening and thinnings of that zone, which give you some indication of the permeability of the reservoir, which tells you where the CO2 has actually gone. What that is telling us is that there are some vertical barriers to flow, which indicates that the CO2 is primarily going to want to flow in a horizontal direction within the reservoir, and has a much tougher time going vertically. One of the interesting things about that is that when the reservoir engineer has had a look at that, he's fairly convinced that the CO2 over the life of the project may not even get to the top of our reservoir. So it's going to take many, many years before it even gets to our seals. And the seals are extremely good, so we really have no concerns about potential migration of the CO2 outside of our reservoir. The first year performance has gone extremely well. Startup was really smooth. We got up to our target rate within a week. There's been a few ups and downs. Those were things like valve fixes and stuff that required a few hours worth of upset. The majority of those big reductions in flow have to do with demand for hydrogen on site. When the demand from hydrogen in the upgrader goes down, the amount of CO2 that's produced also goes down. And so the major gap that started in sort of March through May of this year was a major turnaround at the upgrader, where we basically took half the machine apart and put it back together again. During that time, our CO2 capture was reduced by about a factor of a half. But as soon as it came back up again, we've been back up and producing really well. One thing to note is that there's two dashed lines there. There's a 1 million tons per annum kind of annualized rate and a 1.2 million tons annualized rate. The 1.2 million tons was what we thought our maximum was going to be. We've actually been doing quite a bit above that for a significant amount of time. So the guys at the capture facility have done a really good job tuning the machine so that we're actually capturing more CO2 than we thought we would be able to. The net result has been that even with that big hole in capture due to the turnaround, we still managed to get to 1 million tons before the first anniversary. Yeah, the bottom plot gives you an idea of the well, of the flow into the wells. The well performance has been really good. We did a little bit of capacity testing, and we're pretty well convinced that in the current system we can do about 90 tons per hour into each well. We're actually considering changing the tubing to increase that a little bit. But yeah, the performance on the wells has been excellent. Okay, so I have a bunch of learnings. On the MMV side, the MMV systems have been working extremely well, no triggers. The microseismic array has been really quiet, which is what we expected, so that's a good thing. VSPs have proven very effective in imaging the CO2 in the BCS. And the DAS fiber, this laser optic fiber that we have installed in the wells is working really well. One interesting thing about DAS is that in a normal VSP survey, you actually have to stop injecting in the well, put your geophones in, run your survey. That often means that you have to interrupt the flow to the well for a few days. In our case, because the DAS fiber was already installed, we didn't have to interrupt flow into the well at all. The value of the CO2 that we were putting into the ground over the time of the survey actually is pretty much equivalent to the cost of the survey. So DAS has proven already to be a very, very useful addition to our MMV program. On the well side, we still only have 2 wells active. That's actually contributed to quite a bit of savings, both from the well costs perspective and MMV around the well. The pulse neutron logging confirmed that the CO2 is where it's supposed to be. It's going into the reservoir in exactly the place that we expected it to go, and so that's been very successful. One little comment here is that we had a bit of an issue when we were running the logging runs in spring. Some of the water that was used for pressure testing the logging equipment got into the well and caused some minor problems with hydrates and things. It didn't take much to get rid of it, but it did cause a little bit of a holdup. And so the future plans are that we will not use water for any testing or for anything that has to do with our wells. On the reservoir side, we've had really excellent injectivity, pretty comparable to our best case scenarios. After 25 years, we now think that we'll probably only use about 5% of the available pore space, and that the increase in pressure due to the injection around the well sites probably will only be a couple of MPa. So we're very confident that the wells that we have will be totally adequate for the full life of the project. On the facilities side, the modular construction worked really well, delivered the project on time and under budget. We had some compressor issues, mostly some design problems. Changes were made and not fully modeled. That required a little bit of rework, so that caused us a bit of delays. But overall, we've had outstanding reliability, over 99.5% uptime. Really, the capture facility has only been down for a day or two over the first full year of operations. Some general comments. regulatory stakeholder engagement was really important. Sort of built and maintained really good support. Now when we go out to talk to our local stakeholders, they're actually pretty happy to see us. There's no real major concerns, and everything can be dealt with fairly basic conversations. The risk-based MMV design early in the project with good baseline data was really important. We're now working to sort of figure out what are the key parts of the MMV program that deliver the basic ideas of assuring containment and conformance. And so gradually over time we expect to reduce the MMV somewhat. That is done in collaboration with the regulator because our MMV program is part of our regulatory requirements. And so any changes in that have to be approved by the regulator. And one comment on that, one of the conditions of our funding arrangement is basically that all of the information that we collect is basically made publicly available. So we provide a lot of our information as one of the original managers of the Quest project said, if you want to go and build another Quest, the plans are all there. Basically, you just go to the government websites and you can pretty much find everything you want. So if you're interested in more information about the Quest project, the Alberta government website contains a lot of additional information. On the cost side, our operating costs are trending much better than we'd expected, and as a result, the cost pressures on Quest have been pretty gentle. Gas and electric has been quite cheap this year. Hopefully, it'll continue for a while, but it means that our operating costs have been really good. And the final comment here is that CCS is working. We're getting 1 million tons a year into the ground. Unfortunately, the IEA GHG says we need about 4,000 of those in the next 20 years. So we got to get this thing moving. And finally, just a few acknowledgements. Government of Alberta and Canada have been provided a fair bit of funding for us and quite a bit of support. We've got lots of Shell people working all over the world on these various CCS projects, and lots of contractors. And finally, sort of thanks out to Chevron and Marathon, who've been our partners through this. Okay, so that's it. Any questions?
Simon, that was great. This is Jeff, and that was fantastic, and you left plenty of time for Q&A. We've received several questions that have come through.
Okay.
Remind folks, too, that you can submit your own questions by using the GoToWebinar control panel. I'm actually going to start with a question that came to me, and I had several as you were going through your presentation.
Sure.
It seems that Shell in general has invested more heavily in CCS than probably any other organization on the planet. You mentioned 5 CCS projects. You're invested in a technology company as well. What do you know that other oil companies and other organizations don't? How does Shell see the business case for such a large investment in CCS?
I think that's a good question. I think part of it is that Shell is a company that is that has a very global reach, and so we see the impact everywhere. Our leaders have been fairly progressive in dealing with that. Ben Van Beurden is a big supporter of ensuring that Shell acts responsibly. Hang on, I'll pass over to Stephen because I think he has some comments.
Yeah, and just sorry to introduce myself. Stephen Velta is an external relations manager here with the Quest project. One thing that Shell's been noted for in its history and does a really good job on is developing what we call our Shell scenarios, and they're forward-looking projections that try to map out what do we see the future as, and what are some of the pathways to getting there in the best way. And what's very clear to us, and it starts with our CEO all the way down, is that we're not going to continue to be economically profitable unless we address some of these environmental concerns, and CO2 is probably number one on that list. And so with the understanding that climate change is real, with the understanding of not only how does it impact us as human beings, but also as consumers, and what will people choose to purchase in the future, what will they demand of energy companies. All these things go into some of these decisions. So I think it's an understanding that there will be a shift in the types of energy sources, but that hydrocarbon processing will require improvements right now to reducing our CO2 profile.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that, Stephen. So let me just stick with, I'll call it the business aspect or the financial aspect of this for a minute. There's a couple of questions that came in related to the financing. First was a general question, and the participant asked for you to elaborate a bit more on how the project was financed, funding partners and the financing elements. And then on a more granular basis, second question I'll ask you guys to address both. You mentioned that carbon capture costs are lower than you anticipated. What were you anticipating, and what are the capture costs on a dollars per metric ton basis? It'd be great if you could break out the capture versus the transportation and storage, but any insights you can provide to the participants on the cost, that would be great. Why don't you start then with a question about the overall financing picture and then drill down into the more specifics on the cost.
Sure. So the funding story basically is there's three main components to the funding. One is we had some feasibility money provided by the federal government, by the Canadian government up front. That was about $120 million over a few years. In addition to that, the provincial government, through a series of components, funded about $750 million thereabouts in a number of steps. So part of that was provided in a chunk of money through the construction phase, and then part of that is operational funding through the first 10 years of operations. So that's some of the startup money, and then Shell provided a bunch of money on top of that. As we go through this, the primary funding mechanism is in the offsets, carbon offsets. Our understanding originally was that the carbon offsets in Alberta would be about $15. They've since changed that, so now they're going up to $20 this year. I've already gone up to $20 this year, and will progress to $30 next year. The federal government has stepped in on top of that and suggested that the carbon price may actually increase even more to $40 or $50 in the early 2020s. So it's a combination of funding. Well, there are two big conditions to the funding from the provincial and federal governments. One is that we share everything, and so we've been very open about sharing information about the project. And the second is that we basically are promising not to make a lot of money on this. So if over the first 10 years of the project we actually go revenue positive, we'll stop receiving any additional funds. So the funding will actually cease. The carbon offsets, however, will continue for the life of the project. Was there another question? I think there was another question.
Yeah, well,
the actual price. So what does it cost us? The original premise that we thought was that I can't remember what we said for capital costs.
It was more of a combined.
I think it's over the 25 years. I think capital costs are somewhere short of $1 billion. The operating costs, I think our expectation was that it would be in the $40 a ton range. I can't tell you exactly what our operating costs are yet, but I can tell you that they're quite a bit below that right now.
So you've got the ongoing operating costs at something below $40 a ton, and then you've got the amortized capital costs over the life of the project as well, which adds a dollar per ton cost to that.
What was that, Jeff?
you've got the operating cost at something less than $40 a ton, plus the capital cost, which is spread out over the life of the project, which adds a certain amount to that.
Yeah, exactly. The key thing on the operating costs, as I said, is a little bit on the amine recycle, but primarily on the power and heating costs. Power rates are probably half of what we expected, and gas prices are almost a third of what we'd expected, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it led to considerable savings.
And so, in a sense, instead of getting income from enhanced oil recovery, as a lot of industrial projects do, you're actually getting income because the government of Alberta has imposed a price on carbon emissions.
Exactly. The Alberta government created a regulatory regime, a funding regime that allows us to provides an incentive for us to want to reduce our emissions and start CCS.
Great. Okay. Let me then move to another question that came in with respect to the pipeline. On one of your early slides, you showed the pipeline routing in the graphic, and it's passing through some of the industrial heartland of Alberta. Does Shell have plans to tie to the Alberta Carbon Trunkline pipeline that's currently under construction in the future, or otherwise use some of the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery?
I think those are things that we would consider. They're not actually in the plans right now. But if you look at where the Northwest Refinery is, that's going to tie into Enhance's pipeline, it really sits across the river from our upgrader. So the proximity is very close. And in fact, the Enhanced pipeline will cross our pipeline. So there are opportunities there. There aren't any plans in place right now.
Mm-hmm. Great. A question about stakeholder engagement, and I know you said you had an extensive stakeholder engagement process as you were planning and constructing the pipeline. There's been a lot of engagement, and I think you said that people are actually happy to see you. Can you talk about the background and skills of your stakeholder engagement staff? Was that the technical project personnel? Were there communication folks involved, or was it another process entirely? What was it? What were the critical success factors with respect to stakeholder engagement?
Sure. I think that's a great question for Stephen, so I'll hand over to him.
Great. Thanks, Simon. So, I'll start with a little bit of history on that one. We first disclosed publicly that we were looking at Quest in 2008, and we started our stakeholder engagement program in 2010, and we didn't start construction until a few years after that. And one of the things we did, actually a couple things. So we learned from some of our other experiences globally where it didn't go so well on the stakeholder engagement side, that we really needed to take a different approach this time around. And so we partnered with a local NGO, the Pembina Institute, to help develop a stakeholder engagement plan that would look a little bit different from things that we've done normally. And the key feature of it was really going out into the community and being open to hear their feedback and work that into our plan. So this idea that our community members, that their feedback could make a meaningful difference into our plans. And so it wasn't us just telling them, here's what we're doing, and being very closed. It was about going there, having conversations, explaining, and then really listening, not only to what they were saying, but trying to understand what was behind a lot of what they were saying. And so with the pipeline route, we had over 30 reroutes based upon stakeholder input. Some of that was, I don't want it on my land. Okay, maybe we can move it over a little bit to the neighboring property. Some of it was just how it crossed their land. But again, there was a lot of consultation needed there. And then after that, it was a lot of, just the novelty of CCS, what is it, and concerns around, by and large, the safety of the storage, right? This was it's a rural farming community that doesn't have a lot of industrial development. They really didn't know Shell. And so there was a lot of just getting to know us, getting to know the people on the project team, speaking over and over about what we were doing, why it was safe. And so, you know, we set up a community advisory panel, and Simon sits on that now. And we review, you know, our plans at first, and now we review the data when it comes to the MMV program. And it's a way for the community to really kind of have the sense of transparency with the project, a sense that they can provide input and feedback to the project. And I think that partnership really helped to build trust early on. And without that trust, I don't know that it would have went ahead, at least not on the timeline that we were able to achieve it by.
Great, thank you. A question around the injection area itself and the extent to which the CO2 plume has expanded. Simon, you mentioned that you expect to use 5 to 7% of the available pore space in the injection area. Can you describe that? On slide 15, you had an aerial view that showed an area outlined in red. Is that the area that you're referring to when you're talking about the 5 to 7%? And talk a bit about how big an area that is, what that includes, what's around it. Just give us a picture of what that injection area and the CO2 plume area looks like.
Yeah, so the area we have leased, the pore space that we actually have tenure over, is quite large. So we have probably 3,600 square kilometers or so available area. What the 5 to 7% actually is just saying if all the fluids stay in the block, we won't actually need to take very much at all. If the fluid moves out of the block, we would have massively more pore space. If you look at the actual size of the plume that we expect at the end of 25 years, it's still only going to be a couple of kilometers across. So 2 to 4 kilometers kind of size. So a very small little area. That injection, though, does have a bit of a pressure imprint, and that pressure imprint, although it's only a couple of MPa and it's really a minor thing, that will spread out quite a ways. And so that we expect to spread out almost to the edges of our lease area.
And is that a concern that the pressure, the extent of the pressure increases? Is that a concern for either regulators or property owners?
Yeah, no. We've been extremely conservative on the pressure side. So when we did the mechanical testing of the rocks, we saw that the frac gradient of the rocks, the pressure that you would start to be concerned is somewhere in around between 35 and 40 MPa. We backed off of that quite a ways and actually agreed that we wouldn't inject more than 28 MPa, which we have then backed off even further. So we've settled arms so that if we ever get to 26 MPa, we would actually pause. We don't ever expect to get to above 22 MPa. So really, the distance we are from pressures that would be any sort of problem is significant. So no, it's not should not be a concern for the residents, and is not a concern for the regulator.
And then sticking with what's going on in the subsurface in that area, another question: were the wells, were the injection wells tested to characterize connectivity? And I guess this would apply to monitoring wells as well, to characterize the connectivity and heterogeneity of the reservoir before the injection started, and what were the tests, and for how long did they occur?
Yeah, so we ran a combination of production tests and injection tests. The injection tests were done with water because we didn't have CO2 available at the time. We recognize that that's probably not something we would do again. Injecting water into the reservoir causes some damage to the reservoir close to the wells, and we recognize that on one of our wells the injectivity is not quite as good as it could have been because we've did some a little bit of damage with the injection tests. It's slowly cleaning up, but it's not really a problem. The production tests were run on the other well, the 711 well, and that's given us much better results. The connectivity, the wells are about 6 kilometers apart, so it's a little bit difficult to do really good connectivity testing. But one of the interesting things is not having the 535 well on has meant that because it's acting as a pressure monitor, we're able to see how it responds to the CO2 injection at the other wells. And what we can see is that, in general, any actions that happen at the 819 well are picked up at the 535 well within about 24 hours. So we know we have good pressure connectivity at least.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then one other question related to the injection wells. What was the cleaning process prior to injection?
So that's a good question. I'm not sure I have all the details on that. I can say that one of the cleaning, from a well perspective, one of the 711 well really didn't require much in terms of cleaning, much in terms of cleanup. Basically, the production test actually helped clean it up a little bit. The 819 well, where we did some injection stuff, I believe we actually had to go back in and do a little bit of an acid treatment, I believe, but I'm not sure about the details on that one, I'm afraid.
Okay, and Simon, one more question on details down well before we move on.
Sure.
What's the plan for any shutdowns of the injection, managing the water in the wells during shutdowns?
Right. So so far we've had to shut down the wells just the once, just when we were running the logging run, and because we had reduced capacity, we could shut down one well at a time and not actually interrupt our flow. We've now pushed about, well, as I said, over 500,000 tons into each of those two wells, so 600,000 into one well and 700,000 tons into the other well. We believe that the CO2 is acting more or less like a piston, and it's driving the CO2 away from the immediate wellbore area. So we don't believe there's a whole lot of water in the wells anyway. And we didn't see any indication of any flow back during the shutdown. We do, however, have installed flapper valves, basically at the bottom of each of the wells. So if we were to try and turn the flow around, that would stop any water from getting above the tailpipe. And the tailpipe is chromed, so it's non-corrosive.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to test your versatility a bit. Simon, we're talking about the details of monitoring wells and subsurface. We're going to go back to kind of a big picture, and this question is around BECCS, or bioenergy, with CCS.
Okay.
BECCS requires locations of biomass production to be relatively close by location to the carbon capture facilities. Has Shell ever looked into a full BECCS project, bioenergy with CCS, perhaps to produce ethanol? If not, can you provide any perspective on the BECCS technology given your overall experience with CCS?
Yeah, no, I don't have a whole lot of details. I know we are involved in biodiesel production in Brazil, I believe, and I know the Decatur plant, which we're not involved in at all through Arthur Daniels Midland, does have a methanol facility that is going to be sequestering in Illinois. I think their plans are, well, they've already injected 1 million tons over a few years, and now they're going to change that to about 1 million tons a year at their facility. So I know it can be done, but we're not currently involved in it.
Yeah, and I would say from the Institute's perspective, while there's a lot of promise to get to negative carbon through BECCS, there are a lot of things that need to come together, and one of those is, as mentioned in the question, amount of biomass that's within an economic range of the facility.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of potential, and it's exciting to think about negative emissions, and maybe someday we'll be there, but right now we don't have any investment in that.
Mm-hmm. You maybe this is a quick one to ask. The transportation and storage costs. You talked a bit about cost earlier, and then a follow-up question came in. Do you have transportation and storage operating costs broken out separate from the capture cost?
We do. Internal numbers. I'm not sure how much. I think the pipeline costs have been released as part of our our reporting process. I can say that the pipeline was fairly expensive. A 65-kilometer pipeline, and I believe the pipeline costs were in the $100 million range. I think that's pretty expensive for a 65-kilometer pipeline. Again, first-of-a-kind facility, we were maybe over-conservative in the way we constructed that. The wells, similar story. The wells were actually drilled during a boom time in Alberta, and so the well costs were a fair bit more expensive than they would be to drill now, for example. And I believe the drilling and storage costs were in the $20 million range. The ongoing M&V costs, those are gradually reducing. I think the annual costs for M&V are in the $5 million range. So in terms of the all-up costs, the storage and transportation are a small part of the actual costs. Capture is by far the biggest element.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. You talked earlier about some of the government policy support that the project has received, and you mentioned both the funding you received from both the federal and the Alberta government, but also the price on carbon that's been imposed on the industry, the economics. Can you comment a bit more on how governments, either the Canadian federal or the provincial government's environmental policies or regs, have impacted construction and operations of the plant? And then how do the Canadian policies differ from other countries, or more to the point, what can other countries learn from the Canadian experience about encouraging carbon capture through policy measures?
I can make a couple of comments about that. First of all, the Canadian experience is a bit of a mixed bag. The provinces each regulate and have their own carbon rules and emissions regulations. So Alberta was actually remarkably quite progressive fairly early. I think we recognize that that a lot of the resources we have are fairly carbon intensive, and again, similar to Shell's perspective, it's something you need to get ahead of early. And as a result, the carbon emitters regulations in Alberta have been in place for best part of a decade now. The way that has worked in the past is a sort of an interesting combination of a sort of a cap system and a carbon tax system. It really only applies to, or has only applied to, large emitters, so over 100,000 tons. And so companies like Shell, which do have some facilities that are major emitters, have some incentive to actually try and reduce their emissions. And so I think that played a big part in encouraging CCS development here. Similarly, at the same time, Shell's project was kicked off. There's another, the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line project, used basically the same mechanisms. So we're not the only one getting going on this here, but certainly there is incentive here. The big problem I see with CCS globally is still around the fact that without significant incentives, it's really hard to justify doing something with your CO2. It's pretty easy just to send it up a vent stack or up a smokestack. Without a reason to capture it, without an incentive or a penalty even, it's hard to justify spending money. frankly, it's hard to justify spending your shareholders' money if they don't think there's some way that they're going to get some kind of a return for it.
And so it sounds like policy provides an opportunity to change the economics of projects for companies, incentivize them, and
That's exactly it.
Yeah, so pretty clear on that message to policymakers. What message would you have to others that are on the webinar, whether they're in business or nonprofit or in research organizations? Anything that they can do to, well, as you say on one of your slides, CCS is working, we just need more. So how do those other stakeholders, what can they do to accelerate the adoption of carbon capture, to ensure that there's more of these projects in operation?
Well, I think the first thing is just recognition that that this is a complicated problem. The climate change is happening. It's going to happen. It's about how do we mitigate that and how do we reduce the impact as much as we can. I think it's important to recognize that there isn't one solution. One thing that is a little bit frustrating to me as a CCS practitioner is that wind and solar get a lot of attention, and they are a big part of the solution, but they're not the only part of the solution. And to put all your eggs in one or two baskets is a fairly risky approach. I think what we've demonstrated so far is that CCS, and these, we're right at the beginning of this, and already we're demonstrating that CCS can be relatively cost competitive. As we develop these facilities, we will learn and we will bring the costs down even further. And if we want to be able to address this problem in an economic way over the next 40, 50 years, realistically, we're going to have to deal with hydrocarbons because they're not going away anytime soon. And in order to deal with hydrocarbons, there's really only a few options, and CCS is one of the significant ones. How people deal with that, how people can actually encourage their regulators and their stakeholders to implement change, honestly, I don't know. The only thing I can say is that education is helping. The more people know, the more likely they are to make the right decisions.
Great. Simon, let's leave it there. That was a great way to wrap up. Thank you so much. For those on the webinar, if you have additional questions or if you submitted a question that we weren't able to get to, you can send us an email at webinar@globalccsinstitute.com. Any additional feedback can also go there as well. The webinar has been recorded, and we'll make that available on our website along with a copy of this presentation in the coming days. Thank you so much, Simon O'Brien, and your colleague Stephen for his contribution as well. This is one of a series of expert webinars that the Institute hosts, and I certainly hope that you found this webinar valuable and will participate in those in the future. Last thing I want to say is, as you're leaving the session today, we put together a very quick 3-question survey and would appreciate your time to take, you taking the time to complete it to help us improve the program. Thank all of you for your attendance. Hope you have a great day.